Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to this Fusion21 webinar, Covid-19, the Recovery Stage Compliance Special. This webinar is the fourth in the series and has been put together to share with members and others in the sector how the sector is preparing to enter this recovery stage and to get back to business as normal as a result of this terrible pandemic. Our first session was back on the 12th of May, which seems such a long time ago, and that was a general session. Last week we had a very interesting session on gas safety, and if you missed any of the sessions, you can watch a full rerun or just access the slides on our website. Also, please visit our website to find out about future webinars that are coming up. At Fusion, we have a desire to continue to add value to our members and supply partners, and we hope that the next hour or so will prove to be an insightful, thought-provoking, and aims to give you some of the very latest thinking in the sector, with a particular emphasis on compliance and the disciplines of asbestos, water safety, and electrical safety. I'm Andrew Gray. I'm the Member Relations Manager at Fusion21. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panel. Hopefully you'll agree we've pulled together a diverse panel, and they don't need long introductions, but we have Anthony Smith, who's the founder of Lantei, who are a specialist contractor undertaking a variety of services, including electrical testing, portable appliance testing and remedial work, based in Preston in Lancashire, but operating throughout the country. We then have Gavin. Gavin Hartley is Managing Director of HSL Compliance. And HSL specialise in a number of compliance areas, but in particular water hygiene and water treatment as far as Fusion21 frameworks are concerned. They also provide asbestos services as well. Also delighted to welcome Tom Byers. Tom is Operations Director at Tersus Group, again a specialist asbestos company, and again one of Fusion21's valued suppliers. And finally, to make up today's panel, we have Phil Woodhead, who's Category Manager for Compliance and FM at Fusion21. Phil is responsible for the delivery of all Fusion21's compliance, with the exception of gas, and he leads an expanding team of category and procurement experts who help our members with any issues relating to compliance and facilities management. So a big welcome to all our panel. We would like this session to be as interactive as possible. I know you, the audience, are on mute, and sometimes that can be frustrating, but if you do have a question, please use the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. You should be able to see that in terms of with this slide in terms of the arrow. So please feel free to ask a question at any time. Hopefully you're not having any problems with the audio, but there are in this box up here the ability to change audio settings, but hopefully everybody is able to access the software okay, and we'll hopefully have a very interesting session. So in terms of moving on in terms of the software, we thought we would start by asking the panel to sort of quickly reflect on the last 3 months and give a quick overview of the effect that the pandemic has had on their organisations and in particular their discipline. So let's start with Anthony and Lantei, primarily delivering electrical safety work. How has the pandemic particularly affected your business, and what are some of the things you've been doing to address them?
Well, I think with everybody involved, the first 2 weeks when the lockdown came about, I think people were a little bit frightened about how to be able to proceed forward. But Lantei had been working for the last 2 or 3 years with flexible agile working practices embedded in the business. So being able to come out of an office and to work remotely wasn't anything unusual to us. And in fact, we've been wargaming this from the early February. Couple that with the fact that because of what we do with non-licensed asbestos removal with the P3 masks and the all-in-one suits, we were quite well equipped with PPE in order to be able to facilitate the continuation of servicing social houses. So originally, first 2 weeks, we furloughed a lot of people like most people did, whilst not cancelling any of the appointments that we had. We made our clients aware that we will do what they require to be able to get themselves into a position to move forward. After about 2 weeks, a lot of social housing providers started coming to us telling us that we needed to get into these properties for obviously legal reasons, and we just had to work with them and with the diverse client portfolio that they have in order to be able to facilitate as much of a successful access entry as possible, which, to be honest, after 2 or 3 weeks, we were more or less firing on full cylinders. So it hasn't really affected us, but all them years of pre-planning for different eventualities seems to have stood us in good stead. And we've been firing on all full cylinders after about 2 or 3 weeks from the initial lockdown.
Okay, excellent. Gavin, from an HSL point of view.
Yeah, we very similar. We found the first 2 weeks very difficult. I have to admit, on the 23rd of March, when we heard the announcement, the directors made the decision to close the business on the 24th. We wanted 24 hours to get our heads around exactly what the lockdown meant, get more information. So we took some time to think about that. We saw about a 30% reduction in revenue in that 2 weeks. Our hardest hit area was something like asbestos. We had some difficult decisions to make as a business, that we understood our services were critical, but we needed to make the decision about what services we wanted to continue to operate and what we were going to stop. So some of the choice and the drop in revenue was very much driven by us, that we decided that certain aspects of work we didn't feel fell under the criteria of critical, so we decided to delay them or put them on hold, and sort of continued from there. We ended up furloughing as well about 30% of the workforce, so we've got around 360 people working for us. So we had 120 people furloughed within the first 2 weeks. A bit like Anthony said, all our systems are designed that we can work remotely. We had people working at homes, laptops, that all worked brilliantly, not a problem. It was more from a site level. Again, working in the Legionella and asbestos markets, we've got all the PPE. So we were able to continue to equip our site operatives. And again, by taking that act of triage, by reducing the number of staff, we actually managed to make the PPE go further while we started to get more reliable supplies going forward. To help our customers and our own staff about what we were prepared to do, we developed a property matrix, and basically that was then sent out to all customers, managers, staff, about what type of visits we would do, to what sort of sites and what sort of PPE we required and what we needed from customers. We found it very difficult with basic things like toilets, if we're working on social housing, how to get into toilet facilities, all those sort of things. So there were some difficulties right from the start. But that was the sort of the general overview.
Okay, excellent. So moving then on in terms of Tom.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've found the period very difficult, very challenging indeed. I think it's fair to say that any asbestos consultancies who are working heavily with social housing clients are in a similar boat. We have seen revenues drop substantially as a result of cessation of internal works programs and not being able to do the refurbishment surveys that we would normally do. And so typically we're running at about a third of the rate that we were before lockdown. The furlough scheme has been, as you can imagine, a bit of a lifeline for us. And we did have at one point in excess of 50% of our staff on the furlough scheme. That's slowly reducing. We are slowly bringing staff members back, but we're still a long way off from business as usual. The type of work that has sustained us over the last 3 months has been communal communal surveys, re-inspections, external works. So, some works have continued, but the majority of our programs have stopped. We have seen other problems as well. So we have seen a shortfall in supplies, in equipment, and that started to happen. We noticed that was happening before lockdown really kicked in, and even now we're paying double what we were for suits and masks. So unless Gavin can tell me a better supplier to source our equipment from, so that's an ongoing problem for us. So yeah, it's been a tough time.
Okay, thanks. And finally, Phil, from a sort of Fusion21 perspective, it'd be interesting to sort of get an overview of how things have affected our members and other suppliers on our framework. And also, I wondered whether or not you might also address one of the other areas of compliance, that of lists, which I know some members have had issues with in the past. So, from a Fusion21 perspective.
Sure. I mean, if I take my answer in maybe sort of 3 parts then. So from a Fusion21 perspective, I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, repeating some of what other people have said here around actually ourselves. We've been working from home quite seamlessly. We've made some investment in the last year in IT, and that's gone very well for us. So ultimately, we didn't furlough very many staff at all. I think at the peak for us, that was 2 members of staff. Because we wanted to be here to support our members if they needed us. And yes, more activity and things like that would have been nice on occasion, but actually work for us did continue throughout to sort of normal levels-ish. And I think the encouraging thing for everybody, if you think of the economy, you think of the people in the room, actually there was some new inquiries coming through, and obviously you think an inquiry for us is at the very start of the procurement pipeline before you get to a contract and a project on the site. So the fact that those things are continuing is that seeds are being planted still, which is really, really good. If we take it to an operational level, so my team specifically, and compliance related services, we saw a broad range of responses to the pandemic. And I think interesting, you see some of the supplier insights there, but if I sort of give you some member insights, it was almost polarized at one point where you've got the government saying compliance should still be going ahead, and you've got some organisations that are very risk averse and sensibly decided, look, we're going to just take a pause and decide whether we go ahead. And obviously what contractors do and what members do aren't always the same things, and those two have got to gel. So we did see some members carried on full works throughout, even going as far as access processes and legal processes. And in that instance there, I'm sort of thinking about an organisation where a councillor is getting involved because legal letters have been sent, and actually the board for that organisation was supporting its staff in saying, no, we've been told by the government that the guidance is continue, and so we are. And then we saw the other end of the spectrum where we saw people virtually stop everything other than critical emergency responsive repairs. And you can see there is a very broad view, and there isn't a one size fits all. I mean, you mentioned lifts specifically, and obviously we do have a lifts framework as well. We did see some challenges around lifts, and partly where I think you saw some companies lift load, particularly around loader inspections, where they're sort of 2 or 3 down supply chain with an insurance company. They're looking at the majority of their work, shopping centres closed, offices closed, furloughed huge numbers of staff, and the rhetoric of, oh yes, we're doing the essential ones doesn't quite fit with social housing, where if you've got high-rise lifts and the HSE is still saying you need to do your loader inspections, you need to do your loaders. So we did see some blips and some, I want to say, very reactive moves by members to try and put loaders in place. And I think the particular legislation there does help because it doesn't require it to be sort of misnomer that it must be an insurance company. The loader regulations just say it needs to be an independent, competent person. And I think through various consultants and conversations, most people manage to get those things resolved, albeit there will be those non-critical sites or other areas where if they've lapsed, they'll need to pick those back up. But I think on the whole, what we've seen is that's activity continuing. So.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for that, panel. I'm now going to move on to the sort of the second question, and now that lockdown restrictions have been eased, and we're expecting that to be further eased going forward. You know, what are the challenges you're facing now, and how do you see that recovering? And also, we delighted that we've had sort of a number of questions in, but one in particular, and again, panel, perhaps you could address this, which is basically around, you know, can we put a figure on how we get compliance back on track? So in relation to, you know, how you're now getting back on track, let's start with you, Gavin.
As a percentage, we would be about 90% back on track now. As I say, we managed to stay at 70% anyway. Majority of, so yeah, we're quite high up there at the moment. So yeah, around that sort of 90%.
And in terms of, are there, again, I'm hearing that there are, you know, sort of pressures, price pressures being talked about. Again, is that something, and or, you know, the backlog of inspections and all the rest of it, again, is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, there's price pressures. We've got to factor in the cost of PPE, which we weren't expecting. I think Tom joked about it earlier. That, you know, the cost of PPE was just skyrocketed overnight. And it's not just that; it's also the time to get a visit completed now has increased. And I think, well, I'm not going to steal the thunder from later questions, but it's getting on the site. It's talking to a resident or a site owner and talking through the precautions that we need to take. So there has been a significant amount of additional time now to do these checks.
Yeah.
But from the sort of the point of view of lifting, you know, and we've seen quite a lot of challenges. We're finding it difficult with workload to match workload to expectations, especially during the earlier parts of furloughing. The government scheme was quite restrictive, that you had to have people off for 3 weeks in a period. We had customers saying, well, we'd like this done, and then we had nothing else for them to go on to. So there were some difficult conversations that we needed to try and build continuity of work, that we didn't want to bring people back and then have to furlough them again, and then need to bring them back a week later, because if you didn't keep them off for 3 weeks, then you weren't able to claim the money from the government, which, a bit like Tom, was really important to us to keep the business going on a day-to-day basis. We're still having lots of issues trying to get staff back into the business as well at the moment. That we've got staff still shielding. About 5% of our workforce have sort of what they term as significant health risks, where we can't bring them back in. So we're 5% down on workforce straight away. And schools still aren't open. We're having to work around our workforce at the moment and work sort of as flexibly as we can. So that's really difficult for us at the moment. And our staff are still concerned about going out to site, and social housing is a real concern for them. At times we don't know what we're going to come across. Are we going to walk into someone who is shielding or isolating? Is there going to be a language barrier? So we've got lots of challenges that we have to work around from that point of view. Okay. Good. And Tom, sorry.
Go on.
And as Tom mentioned as well, there's limitations on equipment at the moment. The tank manufacturers, we've still got people asking us to replace water tanks. The tank manufacturers closed down and have only just opened a week ago. So there's a huge backlog on tanks now. We've seen an increase on things like risk assessment, risk assessing sites to decide particular precautions, C&D, flushing, sampling. It's all items which are hugely labour intensive. So yes, we are seeing a backlog, and it's taken us a little bit of time to catch up on some of those.
Okay, excellent. Anthony?
I think I echo a little bit what Gavin was saying about we're near enough, say 90% to capacity with regards to the staff. I think across the business we also have a few people at shielding still, some that can't come back to work because their old man can no longer look after the dog because they're of an age where they have to be looked after. So we have little things like that, which is just general niggles. But with regards to the engineers being out of sight, because they've been well trained over the years to be dealing with potentially hazardous environments, that they've got the confidence in the equipment and the protocols that we've got in place. And to be fair, half of them can't wait to get out of the house because they've been stuck in with wife and kids for that long. They're borderline ready for divorce, so they're ready for work. It's more us putting the kiboshes on them, saying we will do it at a controlled level when we believe that the environments are safe. As far as getting access into properties are concerned, you know, the whole housing team was brought back a while ago, and we've got a really good team of like customer service executives, if you will, that show great empathy, the great communications. We look at people that have got, you know, a diverse range of conditions, language barriers, like Gavin was saying, and also taking into consideration that inherently people have, you know, 6 basic fears of man, so the fear of ill health, criticism, death, dying, loss of loved one. We have all these sort of things that we need to look at, which aren't necessarily pigeonholed into what people would generally sort of accept. So, but the challenge is that even if COVID wasn't here, we would still have it. We still have people, even before COVID cracked on, that don't want people coming in. They have anxiety, they struggle to be able to deal with. This is the nature of the beast when it comes to dealing with social housing. We have no idea what we're going to have. But we've just got to be able to tackle it in a way that instills confidence in the people who, not the clients, but instill confidence in the residents of the properties, and also be able to make sure that we safeguard as best as possible our engineers. If they go somewhere and they believe that it really isn't worth their while in as much as the risks to themselves, then they've got to make that call, but they've got to be bloody good at being able to justify that decision, because ultimately the social housing providers are still wanting these properties to be taken on and to be dealt with. Price, there are price restrictions, there are price issues, I would say. If you allow it, with ourselves, we don't really, to be fair. We set out, this is what we're going to do, and if people want us to do it, then we do it, and we do a bloody good job, and I think we get that through. But there are others, and I know of contractors that are worried about the restrictions on prices, the squeezing of the purse, and probably even more so when we hit some sort of recession. But you've just got to be quite agile. You've got to be quite clever to adapt in these particular environments, because ultimately, if you don't do what you're contracted to do, then the providers are likely to take the contract away from you and give it to somebody else who probably doesn't have the running costs of yourself and can probably make the margins that they're looking for with their particular, you know, outlook on life. So it's the recovery from the backlog. You can only still get through so many properties a day. You're not going to get, in many cases, people paying you for aborting calls. So you've got to factor that into your relationship moving forward. So things have increased in price, but if your price point is good in the first place and the way you operate is good, and I think this COVID thing has been tremendous for us to be able to work from home and to have a look at how to lean the ship up even further in order to be able to deal with some of the increasing costs without having too much of a detrimental effect on the bottom line and service delivery. So there's been a great deal of excitement, as well as the challenges to be able to keep people calm and also keep them safe. And I think that's what the girls and that lot do very well.
Okay, thanks. The same question to Phil.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I guess sort of wearing my sort of 3 hats again. In terms of challenges, you know, quite unique to us is you know, actually seeing procurement colleagues furloughed. So can you get hold of people? But so we take it back to let's say the lifting of the lockdown, I guess. I'd like to say we're seeing a peak, but the reality is, I've spoken with some of my peers across all of our service areas, and I think it's fair to say many organisations are still getting to grips with the changing rules and the new norm. And I think what we've got to remember is ultimately there is finite capacity in the labour market to be able to fulfil some of these things, and there are going to be additional overheads with the controls and the measures around making sure we're doing social distancing. So I think we thought about some of the positive sides of could there be a recovery peak, and I don't want to be a downer, but we're not seeing that at this point in time. I suppose on the positive, there were concerns that we'd had that haven't really materialised. So we looked at we do regular due diligence monitoring for the supply chain, and looking at, and most people have quite good credit ratings. There's always a very small minority, and we keep an eye on those suppliers. But one of the things was around cash flow, and would our members take on board the CCS guidance around payments in the PPNs, etc. And I think on the whole, the really positive thing is, we monitor that very closely. We're not seeing huge numbers of suppliers go to the wall. I say brackets yet. I think invariably you have to look at this, and you see the news with some of the retail sector. There will be impacts, and that does impact on supply chains. But the positive thing is we are seeing that workload increasing day by day, and that's really good. So those negative things aren't necessarily happening. We do see isolated things. Everyone probably knows that plaster is one of those things that's also like hen's teeth. So you do have to look at projects and say, well, at what point does a lack of plaster supply impact on program? If you're doing rewires, are you going to be able to make good that work afterwards? So yes, there are impacts. I think finally, from a lift perspective, the sector is quite well adapted to social distancing. These are engineers working lift shafts mostly, and I think we did have some conversation in the office around contactless lifts, and there's some discussions there. And I did have a sort of call with a couple of our experts just before this, actually, around sort of getting their view. And so there seems to be quite a theme around, look, are people suddenly going to be replacing all the push buttons? They said, you know what, the technology's there. If people want to make the investments, they can, and technically the technologies can be retrofitted to lifts. But are people going to do it? Because the reality is, you look at other countries that have been here, done it, Hong Kong with SARS and Korea, etc., etc. There's other countries that have got much more experience in this, and what you really see actually comes down to the basic regime of cleaning, and it's not necessarily around spending tens of thousands of pounds on upgrading or upgrading all your equipment. So is it just lift push buttons? Well, what about the front door push button, the door handles, and where do you stop? So let's start with the basics, and there may be people that sort of take a long-term view and say, look, if we're putting a new lift or refurbishment, should we go down that contactless route? Dare I say, we don't think that there's going to be a big sudden surge in people spending a few £1,000s to upgrade that component of lift, and various different challenges for that, between voice activation and sort of hovering your hand over buttons. So if people are interested in that, you can do it. We'll see if there's a demand and uptake, and it's something we'll be watching closely.
Okay, thanks. And finally, Tom, and we've had a couple of sort of asbestos related questions, and in particular, sort of outside of the domestic environment. And again, have you seen some issues around commercial premises and businesses taking a sort of slightly different approach?
Yes, we have. Excuse me. We have also seen a reduction in workload from our non-domestic clients, in particular our commercial retail clients. Our workload within those clients has reduced dramatically. The sorts of clients with a big high street presence. We don't yet see a proper recovery from our social housing clients. I think one of the biggest challenges for us is getting visibility of information. So we need to understand when the client's refurbishment programs are going to be going ahead, the timescales for that, and we've got to accordingly plan our workload who are on furlough and plan them coming back off of furlough. And this is quite a difficult thing to balance, but the first thing is visibility of information. That's our biggest challenge. Yeah. We haven't really seen any major price difficulties. We're in long-term contracts with most of our clients, and our pricing hasn't changed throughout the period. We have kept all of our offices open, and that's enabled us to handle any emergency reactive voids works. Some consultancies have taken a view that they would stop all operations, and whether that will affect them in the long term or not, I don't know, but that's not the route we chose to go down. cash flow has been an issue. Let's face it, it's always an issue anyway. We're okay in Tersus. We've got decent cash reserves. I suspect the same won't be applicable to all consultancies. So we will see what happens on the other side of this. There could be some acquisitions available. We shall see.
Yeah.
So yeah, plenty of challenges.
Okay, so moving then on in terms of our sort of next question, and again, particularly from a social housing perspective, one of the main issues has been around access, but I think importantly, customer confidence. And so from your organisation's perspective, how have you been working with both those organisations and with, in particular, the residents in those organisations to try and get back that confidence, so as it's okay to enter their properties and so on. So I'm going to start with you, Anthony.
I think it's a difficult one, in as much as it all boils down to how well your customer service executives are at being able to win the persuasive argument. And I don't mean arguments as in you argue with the customers, because that would be wrong, but everybody has fears. So therefore, by having the team that we have trained in order to be able to understand how best to be able to approach these fears, they can very easily and very calmly be able to assess, each individual person, with whether it be the tenant liaison officers that we have on the grounds, whether it be the team of girls and boys that are in the office that are just solely employed to be able to deal with ringing up and making appointments. Every single one of them has to be trained in order to be able to understand both the conscious and the subconscious parts of the mind and where the emotions reside, and then how best to be able to bring that to them. Because ultimately, you're asked to go into somebody's house, and we've done a very good job at scaring the living daylights out of people in the country, probably justifiably. I mean, it is the most infectious disease that the human race has ever seen. But you're asking them to come in and to potentially bring a contagion in there. So we've got to make sure that not only from the minute we pick up the phone, not just to our clients, but to their residents, to how we deliver the coronavirus protocols that we put in place in February to the residents, for them to be able to understand it, then to give us the acceptance, then what we do when we actually reach the door, how they see us, first impressions matter, how we decontaminate ourselves, what we do when we leave, all that sort of thing, to walk them through in order to be able to make them comfortable. And I've got to say, on the lion's share of it, the residents have been incredibly receptive, and have been they feel a lot more, they feel incredibly comfortable and confident in the approach that we've taken. There are still at won't, and I think that goes for everybody here, but ultimately we can't force our way in there. We can only do the best we can in order to be able to facilitate a safe electrical environment, and also to be able to remove any potential contagion from this property to that property and exposure to ourselves. So I think all of that, there isn't just one solution. I think it really does immediately start with the way you send out your original letters, how you communicate with people, the messaging, the way you talk to them, and the way you're able to calm them down and to be able to give them that level of confidence and understanding that you are there to help them, and not just there to be able to go and be some sort of bolshy sparky. So it's worked with us. We have to be very, very, very sympathetic. But that's COVID or not, you have to be sympathetic. You're going into somebody else's property. You've all got different requirements.
And just in terms of, for example, the length of time, particularly if you're doing a periodic inspection, you take to be in a property. Again, I was on another webinar and somebody was contrasting, the sort of electrical testing regime to gas, and a feeling that you could do a gas boiler inspection in a quicker time than electric. Has that been an issue for you? And the other thing around, the gas boiler is often in the kitchen, and therefore you can ask people to move to different rooms. So again, how has that issue been for you in terms of your inspections?
As far as the inspections are concerned, there's always people on LinkedIn with capital letters that will tell you that it takes 20 days to be able to test a 6-circuit bedroomed house. So with regards to that, it's all incredibly subjective. I mean, it's understanding what a condition report is and what it's not, which I think is a big thing. I mean, it's not initial verification. So we're in there to be able to look at, what the eye sees, and also doing some inspections on the, not some inspections, but doing the full inspections in line with the codes of practice and the guidances that are laid in front of us. Everything boils down to the time to do a test doesn't really change. Most of the times, even without COVID, you've still got people in properties. We're not going into vacant houses. So therefore, we've still got to be able to manage the flow of people, and we're humans, so therefore we don't necessarily follow the rules. We've got to be able to deal with that. But it starts from the very minute a letter goes out. Before our engineers go on site, they don't do any of the contacts themselves. It's all got to be it's a process of managing the residents' expectations. They've got to be walked through the entire process like you were preparing for like a championship match. You visualising everything that's going on. They've got to feel comfortable about it. They'll have a million questions, but you've got to get all that done before you step foot on site. Because a Sparky, best will in the world, is not a counsellor, is not a customer service representative, certainly not a bloody salesman. They're there to be able to test and inspect. So once you're in that property, the time to take doing the inspection shouldn't really take that much longer. I think apart from wiping down accessories that you may touch with an antiseptic wipe and send with a distribution board, that's minutes. But it doesn't as long as you can get in there, the work, it all boils down to the work at the front end. It's how good your team are at being able to give you confidence and you absolutely knowing what your responsibilities are. And then that's delivered to you on a protocol when we get to the front door, for you to be able to read, sign, or wipe over and provide back. So it's all that prep work. But test-wise, there's not really a great deal more additional time needed.
Okay, thanks for that and that additional question. Tom, in terms of your work, the issue of access and customer confidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Anthony has said, but I think the asbestos industry has always been quite well suited to handling a difficult, emotive subject, such as coronavirus, because of what we do with asbestos. And I think the asbestos industry is also well suited because we do have the RPE and the PPE. Anyway, our surveyors out on site are used to wearing it. We've trained our schedulers so that when they do speak to residents, they let them know in advance. This is what your surveyor will be doing. He's going to be wearing this equipment. It's nothing to be alarmed about. We ensure our risk assessments are published online, and so that everyone has access to it. We'll wait and see when we really get stuck into the programs of work how it affects no access rates. I suspect there will still be a reasonable number of residents who will still be concerned, and it will affect access rates for a few months yet. So we shall see.
Okay, Phil.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess my obviously not being a contractor, my answer may be somewhat theoretical to the question, but I thought about the question, and I've been a client and a contractor previously, and whilst not put it into practice, I guess my advice, my counsel would be good workable procedures and communication. Those two things for me. So if you think about social distancing, I think it's fair to say it's going to be here for quite some time. It's something that the operatives and people and organisations, those procedures have got to be maintained over that period of time. And if they're not working, keep them under review and change them. So I think it's got to be able to be workable, and that's sort of the foundations of it. And then probably secondly is communication, because you can have the safest workers in the world, but if they're perceived not to be working safely, or you tell them one procedure and you do something different, that undermines people's confidence in what you're telling them, and therefore their willingness to cooperate. So I think it's important to tell people how you're going to work safely, and then do what you say you're going to do. So I think that would be my team.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, Gavin.
Yeah, I think Phil's really summed it up quite well there. I think communication through this whole process has been key. I think it starts, and Anthony's talked about it right from the start, from the point of contact with the resident to the person you've got going to the site. It's that clear, concise communication. If the office is saying one thing and your site operative is doing something completely different, automatically that resident starts to feel suspicion about what's going on. Are they doing it safely? Are they cutting corners? So we've spent a lot of time making sure that we're communicating out our method statements. Our own staff understand them, exactly what we're expecting from them, what PPE we expect them to be wearing, in what circumstances. But also the office understand that. They will, you know, you get someone turning up in a mask and all sorts of gloves and other sort of things. You know, we're trying to warn residents in advance what to expect. So it's giving them that little bit of prep, especially if we know that we've got any information they're vulnerable or elderly. You know, this guy face mask, you lose a lot of that body language communication straight away by covering the mouth. So we've spent time around that, and we've really focused on the communication. Again, like Tom, we've benefited from being a environmental company, that we actually understand hazards. We work with hazardous materials or chemicals or biological agents on a day-to-day basis. So we've sort of got our technical guys involved quite heavily, but then we've had to break that down into sort of layman's terms, that we're not confusing people with technology and systems, and making it very simple. We brought in things like dynamic risk assessments to help our staff decide whether to do the visit, whether to remove themselves from site, that type of thing. But for me, out of all of this, the communication is key, and it's communication which is reliable at all levels, and it's consistent at all levels.
And I mean, Gavin, specifically in relation to that, but maybe also some of the other panel. You know, have you? I am sure you are coming across organisations, and again, remembering that most of our audience this afternoon are sort of housing association or local authority clients or Fusion members. Without naming names, are there some examples of organisations that have been good at doing that, and what would you say are some of those practical examples, and perhaps others that aren't so good?
I think the vast majority of our customers have been very good. We've had the relationships with the customer before we started. We've always built our business on on relationships. So we've relied on those relationships. The customers have worked extremely hard to get us into sites and to support us. So I think the vast majority of customers have been great. You know, been very supportive, understood the challenges, worked with us. I can think of, all the way through this, a handful of incidents where customers have been less than helpful, and normally it's something in the background which is driving them, that there's a significant pressure. I can think of one, and I certainly won't name the name, but they're under pressure from the HSE. So they've committed to a program that they're going to do, which all of a sudden is falling apart on them. And then it's going back, managing that situation. And we were very calm about it, sort of saying, look, this is exceptional circumstances. If we go back and talk to the HSE, we can control this sort of situation. They will understand. They're not going to start a prosecution. Those type of things. So from my point of view, I can't really fault customers, and I think they've been exceptionally supportive on payments and things like that as well, which has become lifeblood to all of us. It's not in our nature as a business to really be pushy over payments, but we've had to become more assertive because we've needed to drive money through the business, and customers have been fantastic with it. They've been really, really supportive. So I can't thank people enough out there who are our customers of how good they've been over the last 3 months and how supportive they've been.
Anthony, just in terms of that communication, again, just coming back to you, and potentially some examples of where that's been good and perhaps where it hasn't been.
Listen, on the whole, I can see Gavin stroking his chin, thinking what we're going to come out with here. But I'm going to echo what Gavin said there. I mean, our customers are class, right? But we said from the very beginning that we understand why they would put things on hold, and we're not bothered. We're here when you're ready for us, because we've got enough commercial and industrial stuff, along with EV charging and everything else that we deal with, that we can divert resources to be able to keep them occupied and keep them busy. Because a lot of people saw this as a great opportunity to carry out maintenance, and so it hasn't bothered us. I think there's only been one customer that came back and said, I need you to do this tomorrow, and if you don't do it, then we'll just go to the third or fourth person on the tender and get them to do it. And we're like, well, doesn't matter. If you want to do it, we'll get it done. I think that's probably about the only harsh conversation that we've had. But again, it's what factors are driving them forward. You know, when you know, for a period of time, people are saying, well, you don't necessarily need to do compliance. I believe in the opposite, you do. I don't think that COVID is a reason enough to be able to not continue, you know, one's legal obligations. But that's everybody else's opinion. For me, I'm not really too fussed. If you want the job doing, then you give us a shout. But on the whole, you know, having the ability for, and we always knew that it's not going to be for us, and I think for a lot of people like us, like a slow return to work. The contracts haven't been cancelled, they've been postponed. And then the minute they decide to have them done, it will be they want them done last week. And if you don't get them done last week, then we want a meeting with you to find out why. So you had to be ready to absolutely pounce, because even if your building burnt down, you should be able to go to PC World, pick up a laptop, and there should be absolutely no disruption to customer service whatsoever. And I think we've done quite a good job of being able to do that. So we recognise in the one instance, and it's only been one instance, where there were factors driving that sort of, you know, that sort of approach. But to be honest, it hasn't really fussed us. To be honest, it's just okay. Get on with it and get it done.
Okay, Tom or Phil, anything in terms of that communication bit that you want to add?
Yeah, sure. Our clients have on the whole been very helpful, very communicative. Apart from letting us know when their refurbishment programs are going to be back online, we are still maintaining dialogue with them. Some have been helpful in terms of things like expedited payment terms. We've even had a cash prepayment from one client for works to be conducted later in the year. So yeah, I mean, relationships are still there, still strong. We're staying in touch with them as often as we can. So in general, communication is okay. We just need visibility of programs of work.
Okay, excellent.
Just to chip in there, I guess from a Fusion21 perspective, we see that, you know, contracts. We have public contract regs. We have to do all of those things, and that's great. But you know, partnerships and that's with a little p, not talking for, but these arrangements work through people cooperating and working together. And I think actually, on the whole, what we've seen is that the pandemic has brought out the best in people, a willingness to cooperate and a willingness to work together, which is really good. You know, because it means actually if everyone wants things to succeed, then you can achieve a lot. And there are always barriers and restrictions that mean things have to be done or can't be done. On the whole, I think everyone's responded really well, and it's really positive to see that happen. I think as you get down the line, you know, you do get back to sometimes, you know, we have to get back to the norm, and you know, sometimes then there are more difficult conversations, but certainly through the hardest period here, I think it's been good. It's all worked together. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay, and that leads us nicely into the sort of final question, which is about, you know, if every cloud has a silver lining, or if, you know, how do you think the new normal will differ from the old, and what are the positives that we can take from the crisis, and how do you think they will affect future working? So let's start with you, Tom.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I'm very much hoping that the new norm isn't reduced revenues and workload, but we'll see on that one. I mean, it could actually be that there is going to be a sudden peak in demand, and that will bring with it a new challenge in terms of, you know, in terms of our resources and getting our surveyors out on site. So, but I would welcome that challenge. I'm hoping that the new norm isn't asbestos being sidelined. I think there has been some evidence of that over the last few months, and in fact, the regulator of social housing in their compliance reports that they've been doing on a monthly basis has picked up. that, there's been material backlogs with respect to asbestos works. So, So I'm hoping that asbestos won't be sidelined, because obviously it's still as dangerous an issue as it has ever been. It's still Britain's biggest killer, with more than 5,000 deaths a year. So I'm hoping it won't get sidetracked. I think the new norm in terms of our working arrangements within Tersus will change. Like everyone else, we've adapted to working with Teams and Zoom and whatnot, and working from home. So, and it has worked. It has worked for the management team, and I suspect that's a good thing. It reduces travel and environmental benefits there. So, yeah, there is some silver lining there. So we shall see.
Okay, Gavin.
I think this is the million-dollar question, isn't it, of what it's all going to look like afterwards. Being a compliance business, we strongly believe we're going to be sort of well insulated. The services aren't going away. There's still a requirement to do them, especially in social housing and local authorities. Yes, there's going to be an impact in retail and other areas, as I think businesses will go under, the economy is going to reduce. But from a local authority housing associations, I don't really see it changing that much. We have some concerns that we saw after sort of Grenfell, that there was a lot of money diverted away from the normal compliance businesses into fire, and quite rightly, that things needed to be done, residents needed to be protected. So I would hope that we don't see the same again, that huge amounts of money are diverted into one area. I can't see that in this instance. So very much believe that the compliance side of the business will continue as normal. The positives, I think it's going to change the way people operate. I think now people have got a taste of working from home, and most of our managers could work from home anyway, but I think it will increase flexible working, which I think could be a good thing. So hopefully that'll move. Changes in hours, but again, it's difficult for someone like ourselves that we have to provide services, and when people need us, there's no point us saying to one of our staff they can work from 4 in the morning to 8 or 9 in the morning, because our customers aren't in at that time. So we are limited on what we can do with that. So other effects, I think there'll be, off the back of this, I think there's going to be more environmental awareness. I think there was the big issue about how much the air quality's improved without the traffic. So I think this is the start of, we're going to be challenged as contractors, where we've got lots of people out doing services. How can technology be used to improve service? How can it reduce the number of site visits? How much more can we invest in electric vehicles? And I know we've already looked at that to sort of keep up with it. From a personal point of view, I believe, and I think everyone does, that we will go into this recession. I think it's going to, I don't think it's going to be like 2008. I think it's going to sort of hit the bottom very quickly and bounce back up. And from our point of view, where we had drop in revenue, we've already seen that recovery. And I really sympathise for Tom, because I've got a very small asbestos business, and I know how difficult asbestos has been. And even on that, we're seeing the recovery now. Mm-hmm. So overall, yeah, there's going to be changes, and as forward-thinking businesses, we're going to have to be agile and be prepared to move with change, and that's what we're ready to do. Okay,
yeah, excellent. Anthony.
Again, I sort of sound like a sort of record echo a bit of what Gavin's talking about, especially on the positive side of things. I think this has been really good for the implementation of technology. I think people don't fear change, they fear being changed. And without sounding like cliche King himself, you know, change doesn't come from comfort zones. And I think this has been a very uncomfortable period for a lot of people, and has forced them to have a look at the way that they operate. A lot more people working from home will give great holistic working experiences, but then could also be viewed as being intrusive on the personal life. So there is a lot that we need to do. I think in short, we just need to bunker down and get through till next March, next April. You know, we get through. You haven't built these hospitals for nothing. I think, you know, there's a potential that we'll have an issue when it comes to the autumn time with the resurgence of respiratory infections. And we need to be able to be agile. But most pandemics tend to have a life expectancy of about 2 years with regards to its traumatic impact on society as a whole. And this money that we're giving out needs to be paid for. So for me, it's not a new normal. It's not an old normal. We've got to bunker down until the middle of next year. And until we either have a vaccine or, dare I say, herd immunity, you know, society is going to be walking on eggshells. But we will go back to normal. And there won't be the huge change that people expect, because there's no financial and no economic appetite for that to happen. The minute we can be firing on all full cylinders, the treasury and the coffers are going to be wanting to be filled. People are going to want to be back at work. They're going to be wanting to go on the holidays. Cash is king. We may have seen a brief period in our history where a version of socialism has helped to bail out capitalism, but I think that, you know, by the end of next year, we'll be straight back into the normal way of life. You know, we have got a recession. We will not be sitting and resting upon our laurels and thinking, oh, you know, we need to be. But the air quality has been great. You know, my hay fever has never been so bad, but it's been great. It has been wonderful, but it's a short-lived thing. You know, this is our first year of this pandemic. We'll get through winter, get through spring next year, and I think by the time it gets to the end of next year, most things should return back to normal. Because if they don't, then we're buggered. Getting access into properties for social housing providers will be the least of our issues. So we'll be straight back to square one. People don't like that, but unfortunately, they realise that is the bare bones, and that's the truth. We need to make money. We need to put money in the coffers to provide for those that don't.
Okay, and I'll have the final word to you, Phil.
Great. I guess just picking up maybe on some of those sort of financial messages there, I suppose I'd really love to end on a really positive message. I guess from my perspective, looking at new norm, old norm, I think it's too early to tell. I think from the sort of sector or part of the maintenance world that we work in as a group collectively in compliance, I have to agree with Gavin. I think compliance is here to stay. I do think fire safety will remain a priority. There's lots of high-rise buildings still with cladding on, and if we move outside of the housing sector, there's lots of other buildings, hospitals, schools with combustible cladding as well. So the fire safety issue isn't going to go away, but I think what it's done partly is refocus people's minds on compliance. You know, I remember the good old days 10 years ago, and in the housing world, you know, the regulator was only interested in gas safety. I think actually all these other compliance strands are moving up that agenda. I think boards want to do the right thing, and so I think compliance is here to stay, and these things will get done. I think in terms of the wider economy and the wider sort of sectors, you know, social distancing is going to come at a cost. We have to expect to see cost rises, certainly in the shortfall. You know, contractors can't be expected to carry all those costs, and so members need to be mindful of that. But we can't be blind to some of the very broad messages out there from people like the Bank of England around inflation. You know, public sector spending has been huge, and I think what we will see is differences between parts of, let's say, local authorities who will really suffer, but maybe housing associations and other housing providers that have different revenue streams potentially in slightly different positions. So I don't think we will see one size fits all. But you can't, you know, it's not possible to balance the books with the degree of spending that's been there without deciding that you're not going to do some other things. So there will invariably be impacts. I think too early for me to maybe try and guess with the crystal balls what they might be, but certainly costs and risks are here to stay for some time to come.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that one. So it just leaves me to sort of very quickly wrap up, and I want to thank you, our audience, for being with us. We've had a very good numbers this afternoon, so thanks for that. Thank you for your questions. If there are any additional questions, we'll get round to answer them. So apologies if we didn't have enough time for all of that. And finally, I really want to thank the panel for their openness, for their honesty, and for their insights in terms of what's going on. It's been a really interesting session. As I said at the beginning, This webinar will be available on the Fusion website, so please signpost this for any colleagues you may have who weren't able to make it. We will be running some future events, so again, we will email you, or please go back to our website to find out. So thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Stay safe, and we'll see you all again. Thanks and goodbye.
Thanks,
Stay
Andrew.
safe.
Thank you.